Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is TV Skyn, and if you saw yesterday, I did a animation breakdown of the recently released Misfortune Animatic. Went through a lot of the animation techniques used and what I thought of the thing. And Riot, because they apparently want me to do more of these videos, that's definitely the reason why they're doing this, have just released another animatic with ZED this time. Now, it's much shorter, clocking it at only 1 minute and 11 seconds, so I figure I'm just going to let it run. We're going to watch it together, and then we're going to get into a discussion of the animation techniques used, a little breakdown of exactly what role this plays in League of Legends lore, and how I feel like these animatics are improving or working for the lore. And yeah, hopefully this will not be a 30-minute video, but you know me, so let's just have a look at it. Right, so that was, first of all, was just completely awesome. Now, in terms of narrative, this short is... it's fight porn. It is fight choreography pornography. It doesn't really have a storyline. It doesn't really have a thematic. It doesn't really have anything other than Zed is a fucking badass, and he murders 3 dudes like a badass in a badass way with a lot of badass moves, doing badass things, and one of the opponents also turns out to be kind of badass, but not badass enough to out-badass it. Like, it's Zed is a badass. That's the whole point of the thing, and that's really all there is to it. So let's try and go through the shots a little bit. Now, like I discussed yesterday, a lot of the animation here is accomplished by moving shapes relative to each other. Not as much. Like, this Misfortune short that they released yesterday was a set of extremely limited animation. Like, it was very, very sparse with how much movement, how many hand-drawn frames of animation it used. This one is a much more complete animation, which is probably also why it's a lot shorter. So, but there are a couple of things that it has in common. First of all, notice the camera. The camera moves a lot, almost all the time. You can see it when you see the soldier walking into frame first. There's a little pan on the camera, and as I set the shot to go again, notice how the foreground here, these elements, moves at a different speed to the midground elements here, and then the background elements move at their own speed relative to each other. Right? You see it? They zoom in at a different rate. And that's essentially, it's the same thing as parallax scrolling in old video games, if you remember from your childhood, 16-bit games where you needed to put depth of field into the image. And again, because this thing does not really have the budget to fully animate an interesting forest and make all the branches move and there's wind or stuff like that, then this is a very simple way to you break up the drawing into different layers, and you move those layers independently of each other. It gives a great sense of depth and helps the scene feel very dynamic. And it's the same thing you see here. The shadow of Zed up in the trees moves at a different rate from the trees that he's sitting in, moves at a different rate from the background down below. And that gives this great sense of depth and a sense of deep movement. Now, this shot in particular I find interesting, because take a look at how things are moving relative to each other. It's not impossible that this is actually a 3D model that they built and used just for this particular shot. And the reason I think so is because of the lighting effects and because of the particular way, like the fluidity of the movement itself makes me think so. But it's also possible that they achieved it, again, by moving different elements of a drawing relative to each other. I don't think so, though. It looks 3D to me, but because the texture is so perfectly aligned with the rest of the art style. And by the way, thank you to the person on Twitter who made me aware that you can scroll through frames on YouTube by using the period and comma keys. Because it aligns so perfectly with the aesthetic of the rest of the short, you don't really notice it, and it's such a short moment, too. And speaking of 3D, I'm reasonably sure that the trees and the background in this particular shot are all 3D animated. And the reason I think so is because, as you see, as ZED is, and you can see animation smears being used here to communicate the speed of his rotation. As ZED moves down, you can see the whole scene rotates, and the angles on the objects change, and that kind of thing is super crazy difficult to hand animate, and it takes a lot of time. So I don't think they actually bothered. Now, as ZED falls, notice that ZED is not fully drawn here, like at all. He doesn't actually even have his iconic red scarf falling out of his hat. He's just a kind of a gray blob that is kind of vaguely person-shaped, and having him be that also helps them use these animation smears. And you can actually see here, the artist forgot to draw just a little bit of the arm there as his arm moves down. And again, we forgive it as a viewer, much like in the Misfortune short, because the movement that's guiding our eyes makes our brain fill in the gaps in what's going on. And you can see here, this compared to this frame is not quite fully drawn. You can see there's a lot of gaps in it, but again, because it's only one frame, we don't really notice it. And here, they begin a set of effects. Now notice what ZED's arm actually does here. It becomes a smear on this frame, and then it goes from being completely curled around his body to, whoom, it's outstretched. And the reason that works for us is because, first of all, the smear here has set up the motion. We know that our eye understands that this motion is coming, and it's going in the direction of the smear that way around. So when we come out here, the lighting effect, the effect from the shuriken he's about to throw, guides the movement of the arm so that we understand, okay, it was swung around him, and then with the next frame, as the lighting effect continues to go, and you can see his entire body just turns into a huge smear right here. And it's okay because the lighting effect from the shuriken guiding our eyes forces our brains to understand it as the smear of motion. And it's pretty much the same, and you can see ZED falling here. And once he releases the shuriken, notice that ZED almost completely stops moving. He just keeps this pose while the lighting effects for the shuriken as it goes towards its target do most of the heavy lifting of the visuals. And this is something that, if you're trying to do a scene where there's this much movement and action going on, you will want to pick. Because if ZED was doing all kinds of weird, spinny, twisty, backflippy motions at the same time as the shuriken was flying outwards into the frame and leading us to understand that when the next cut comes here, it's because we're following the shuriken instead of ZED. If ZED was doing all kinds of backflips and motions and spinning around and shit here, that would distract from that. And this is a really clever cut, by the way, because we go from a completely different perspective of the scene, set high up in the trees falling, which, if you were cutting naturally into the scene here, you would want to look down on the soldiers from above, because that's the position the camera was in. But because we have the flash of light here, which comes from the top right of the screen down towards the bottom left, and then leads in, again, it comes from the upper right side of the screen down to the left side, boom, hits the soldier. And again, the heavy lifting here is all done by the lighting effects from the shuriken. And there's very little clever. You can see there's just one frame where everything goes black. This is a technique that's very common in anime in particular, as are all these lighting effects, by the way, which just indicates, boom, that there's a moment of transcendence. In this case, transcendence, where the guy just gets murdered. And you can see, actually, the soldier, he's just a formless, not formless, he's a very well-formed black blob in the background here, and as the animation requires him to be destroyed, he just becomes rubber, basically. Right? That's what he is. And it works because it communicates the motion correctly. And notice how when the soldier moves, right? This is a very small thing, but asynchronous animation is an important concept. When the soldier makes his movements, even as the other guy over here is turning his head, he's not turning. You can see the soldier moves, there, turns his head. This guy moves again, turns his head, moves again, turns his head. So they're out of sync with each other in their motion. And this is important because if everything moves on the same frame, if the soldier's head was turning on the same frame every time as this guy was moving down, the shot would look a lot less alive. And it's a very small thing because, again, this shot is like that long. So you don't notice it. And it's the same thing with these two soldiers. They don't move on the same frames. You can see this guy's head here. He finishes his motion. Then this guy does his motion, looks around, and then this guy looks. They don't move simultaneously because if they moved simultaneously, completely simultaneously, that would make the scene look flatter and make it look less dynamic. Because in real life, of course, everything doesn't move at exactly the same timing. And here's a very interesting... One of the things you have to be very careful with, this is just directing. When you move the camera perspective, you kind of don't want to break the 180 rule, which is you don't want to completely move the camera into a new position that's completely divorced from the previous shot. Which they kind of do here, but the thing they use to lead us into understanding where, like here we are looking at the dead soldier from a distance. Now we're looking at him way up close. And the thing that the camera uses to establish, oh, this is where the camera is now, is the shuriken, which we can't really see here except this is just this little white hook. But the shuriken here in this shot now establishes, oh, this is the dead soldier we're looking at. We have changed perspective on the camera. And this is where the two very soon-to-be dead soldiers are about to die. And you can see, again, they use the lighting effect to communicate the transition. The shuriken flashes in the frame, and then the frame flashes, and it's ZED turning up. With some... I mean, this is my freaking jam. The effects like these... Especially when you slow them down, you can see how they're just... The artist just went like... in a lot of different directions in order to create a lot of the movement there. But it works in motion because they keep the shape of the thing consistent, right? We have an explosion outwards that creates a hole in the middle of the cloud. The cloud moves outwards in the hole as the middle of the hole expands. And there we have ZED. Now, I know I said I didn't want to make this like another 30-minute video, but it kind of looks like we might be getting one. And again, notice... During this shot, when ZED arrives, let's just play it at normal speed, the camera's moving. All the time. It's just moving, just very subtly, very slightly moving. And it's the same thing in this shot again. The camera's constantly panning just a little bit across the scene, giving us this handheld quality that gives the scene just a lot more life just by virtue of movement. And again, this soldier is being zoomed, panning through the frame at a slightly different rate than the background. You can see it if you look at the edges of his shoulder here. And the soldier behind him is moving in a different frame as well. And I'm pretty sure that this soldier just, like, cut this guy open.
Sven, you have a little itch on your shoulder. Here, I will help you. Oh, that is very good, Ben. Thank you very much. It is good to have friend with scratching stick.
And again, look at the head here, the motion that it makes, right? You can see the head is being moved independently from the shoulders again. And this helps give the illusion of motion. It's kind of difficult to animate a neck by hand when you have to animate the head as well, if you have to animate the whole thing as one thing. So you can save yourself a little bit of work by moving the head independently of the rest. And you can see, also you can see the frame transition here. This guy's about to burst into movement, right? So you can see, because these frames go by so quickly, they don't really have to be super consistent across every frame in order to work. And again, lots of animation smears, blah, blah, which is being guided again by the lighting effects on the weapons. Here, huge animation smear, and it works because the effect of the weapon, the after trail it leaves, just guides our eyes and tells us this is the motion it was taking, which is a great way to get away with doing such limited animation. And again, different rates of scrolling and zooming for different parts. And whoop, animation smear. He's turned into Zack all of a sudden. And again, they contrast the light gleaming off his weapons with a dark flash across the screen, which gives the weapons this fantastic deadly gleam. And you can see as Zed swings his weapons, the whole foreground expands around the motion, which gives us a greater sense of the impact of what he's about to do. Like, oh, these weapons are dangerous as hell. Oh.
Thor, my face just went very wide.
Animation smear. Great way to make him turn quickly. And again, he's scrolling at a different rate than the soldier behind. And you can see, again, animation smears being helped by light effects to guide our eye to the motion of the weapon. Which helps us forgive a little bit that, look at this, what happens to his arm here. It's just blah, 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 blah. But because our eyes are following the lighting effect, we're not noticing these aspects. And this is like, if you watch Disney movies as well, and you go through them frame by frame, you'll see exactly the same thing, where these single frames that just look completely out of proportion, weird, like barely human at all. But it works because the animator is doing a great job of guiding. See his face here? Of guiding our eyes to the motion of the sword as the focal point of the animation, so we don't really notice that the body of the guy is completely transforming weirdly. And again, several frames where the head is just the same copy-pasted thing with the body moving underneath, because the head doesn't need to change as much as the body does. But I really do adore... This is a small thing, but I love this particular shot of the soldier charging, because you can see here... He's got some dark shadows on him, but as he gets angrier and angrier, the shadows come into focus and they deepen on his face. And by this time, like this is complete Frank Miller all of a sudden. And it really works because the lines on his face deepening into rage communicates very well the anger that he's charging with. And again, we use a flash of light to guide us through a scene transition. And here... Again, we're into 3D animation. You can see the smoothness of the motion as the camera moves and we come into focus. And here, I think a lot of the elements in this scene are painted. They're drawings that are inserted into a 3D space. But it is a 3D animation panning across a 3D scene. And again, finally YouTube's getting annoyed with me. And again, we use a lighting flash. Because what we have here is a black shuriken flying in a mostly gray space. So, whoop, a little flash of light there to tell us, okay, this is the moving object that we need to pay attention to. There's a shuriken coming. Someone's about to be dead. And as it hits us, the viewers, the screen, another flash of black and light to transition us into the next shot where we understand, okay, now the shuriken has moved to the left here. We're going to follow what it's doing to this weird smear of a man. Who again, whoop, smear, 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 light effects guide us. Because we know the shuriken is coming in from the right, it moved out of frame to the left, it's coming in from the right. We see it, boom. And this is a great animation smear, by the way. Smear here to communicate the speed, pow. Spend a little bit of time just on the deflection, whack. And then keep the smear going as you see the whole scene shift. And again, I think the background is a 3D space. You can see because the whole thing is moving around so that they can move the camera around the soldier without having to redraw the background 10 million times. And lots of animation smearing and blurring, a hell of a lot of blurring, which is actually really important here because if you made all of this unblurred, the eye might start to catch on to the fact that the animation is actually very rough. Again, we're back to the 3D space, and here I'm actually sure that ZED, this particular version of ZED, is a 3D model. And I think that's how they're achieving the shadow effect that we're about to see. Because you can see he moves rather smoothly. I think there's some 2D animation on top of the 3D model in order to communicate the splashing of the feet. And then he bursts into this very... Yeah, he's the 3D model. I think I can tell by the texture at this point. Bursts into this weird shadow shape, and then we get this fantastic shot as his eyes come into focus. And here we transition from a 3D model, I think, to a 2D drawing. And it's the eye, again, this is again guiding us like the shuriken did before through the exact same scene. The flash of the eye into center frame is guiding us. That Zed is moving towards us. So when we see this guy, we know that, and with the speed lines, we know that Zed is moving essentially through this guy, moving behind him. But the guy's wise to him, and again, a great use of animation smear. And again, you can see some asynchronous, where the soldier is mostly moving on the same frames, but you can see he's not turning quite on the same, on equal frames. I love this smear. This is a really good smear. Because it communicates so much motion of his raising the weapon, and he's jumping. And by the way, we never have to see his legs jump, because the weapon, the motion upwards from the weapon just creates that for us. And then down. And by the way, notice this guy doesn't have a helmet on anymore, somehow. Did Zed knock it off? No, he didn't. He just doesn't have a helmet on anymore. But we don't notice because, again, we're not really focused on his face. We're focused on that. Right before the hit lands. Boom, flash of light. And here we can see a cut happening. Something's being cut apart. And here, this is a 3D model of a sword, by the way, I'm pretty sure. That's being shattered, indicating that Zed has got the upper hand here. And again, because Zed is mostly shadows, they can use this black, and you can see they do these after image effects on the smears as well, and they use points of light in his eyes to guide. This tells us that Zed is facing towards the camera right now, and that helps us understand that when he does this weird-ass motion, he's spinning around. And again, here, the motion of the smear of the weapon tells us, oh, this weapon right here has just stabbed straight into the gut of this poor dead bastard. But interestingly, you can see there's actually no wound on him. And take a look again, we get this inverted color scheme where the guy turns white because he's the one being killed. And boom, here's the only point in the drawing process where he seems to actually have a wound. I think maybe they drew some blood on him there, but it's kind of hard to see. And notice how, again, because here, after Zed has finished the motion of the stab, the thing we want to look at is the reaction of the soldier as he realizes he's dead. So Zed mostly stands still while the soldier does the acting just for a few moments, so that it guides our eyes to his reaction. And again, here comes the soldier. This is just the same frame, copy-pasted there. One change. And this brilliant motion. This is a really nice piece of animation too, by the way. Because it's using the lines of the soldier's chest guard or whatever, or maybe it's just the shoulder lines, to guide us into the idea that the camera is spinning around Zed. And you can see Zed here is bunch of black with a couple of points. And again, the points for light, because the points of light as the eyes have been established so clearly, we know, okay, so that's his head instinctively. We just understand that this is so. Again, bunch of animation smears. He just strikes through the shadow. Here comes the death mark, a growing X, which mimics what we see in the game, and just a bunch of clever anime style. Ooh, nice. Little flash of skeleton there, which again indicates death, which tells us this guy is pretty much done and gone. And you don't really see it when you just look at the thing. This is going to take 2 hours if I'm going through this frame by frame. And again, lots of use of motion blur to understand. And here again, because we don't really see where Zed goes after he murders this guy, right? So the animators were clever and said, okay, so then let's identify where Zed is by using this moment of dark shadow as the soldier dashes out of frame to connect to Zed's movement upwards. So using the shadow to identify who and where he is. And again, great use of anime style effects and some clever motion smearing. I think I'm going to go through the rest of this a little bit faster because otherwise we'll never, ever get done. And I think I've covered most of the techniques and things they used. Again, white smear on the weapons guiding the motion of the blade, even as the animation smearing turns the soldier into kind of an indistinct blob. And I think, again, the ZED shadow motion might be 3D animated, because that's probably a lot easier to do than hand animating every frame. Ooh, I really want to nerd out about this, because see, a couple of these 2 frames are just copy-pasted of the same soldier. Then there's an effect of light, which communicates the spin. And most of the work of the spin is really done by that. But also these are just gorgeous animation smears. And again, the soldier's spinning his weapon. The work is done by the light. You can see the light changes from the right side to the left side, which tells us, okay, there's been a motion around, and that's how we get all that gorgeous spinny motion going on. And again, the fight here, because it's 2 dark blobs fighting in a forest of dark lines and blobs, the use of the light on the weapons to communicate the motion allows the animators to just smear the hell out of both of these guys, because the light from the weapons as they collide and as they pass through the scenery does a hell of a lot of the work. And ooh, this is a good little... does a hell of a lot of the work of telling us where the weapons are, who's wielding what, and identifying each character. And again, as the weapons collide, the whole color of the scene changes to heighten the impact of the hit. And this fight scene between ZED and the one competent soldier is clearly the primary focus of the animators for this thing, because it's just gorgeously put together. And here you can see the soldier putting all of his weight into the swing because his leg is raised, and then it smears onto the ground to indicate a stomp as he brings the rest of the body around in a big smear, and it's just gorgeous. Pow! Shadow kick to the face, I guess. And again here, because in a lot of the previous shots, the soldier was very well detailed, very well realized. You can see lots of features of his outfit and stuff. Now that he's fallen down, he just becomes a gray thing with some lines across it, because we don't need to see who the character is anymore. The important bit is here. When ZED, again, this is, I'm reasonably sure this is at least partially a 3D model, but the scarf, I think, is hand animated. Lays him down and kills him, and that's pretty much the end of that. And it's just a gorgeously put together piece of animation, and I'm just gonna set that to loop and let it run for a little bit while I discuss. In terms of the previous Misfortune short, was something I liked quite a bit because it gave us a window into the characterization of Misfortune as someone who fights and who will fight brutally and relentlessly and ruthlessly and will kill her enemies, but she doesn't enjoy doing it. Like, there was a moment of characterization that, yeah, Misfortune just badass murdered a whole ship of pirates, but afterwards she needs a stiff drink and she needs to sit down and she just wants the violence to end, fundamentally, which is a great piece of characterization. That's not really present here. There's no characterization here other than ZED is randomly murdering people in a forest for some reason. That's never adequately explained to anyone. So there's no characterization in this short. This short, all it really tells us about ZED is that he's a badass ninja who kills people in badass ways. And that's enough, I think, because something, as I've mentioned a lot when I've talked about Riot games and the need for a living lore for League of Legends, this kind of content is exactly the kind of stuff I think works for that. Because it's not... Okay, it's not like this huge epic piece of characterization with ZED and a tragic backstory and an epic struggle against some foe and blah, 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 and involving the whole world. It's just this little piece of stuff that ZED does in his daily life, which is to say murder people for whatever reason. And even if it doesn't characterize the guy, even if it doesn't, this tells us something about who he is as a person, it still heightens, like, okay, so ZED is not just... They're not just telling us that he's a badass ninja who can kill a bunch of people. They're showing us in no uncertain terms that when he ambushes people in a forest, those people are gonna die. It's showing us in no uncertain terms that he's a badass super martial artist shadow ninja who can fucking slash people to death anytime he wants. And I think this is really important, and I really hope they release lots more of these. I hope they just give their artists and animators just like, hey, guy, if you want to spend the next week just doing one of these, just do that for a week. That's fine. Like, we can put another project, let that be delayed just for a few days so that you and a couple of friends can do this thing and just show the characters doing stuff, show them interacting, show them doing what it is they do, because that stuff helps so much in bringing the world of League of Legends to life. And that's the thing more than anything, I feel like League of Legends has been missing. And this video is 30 minutes already because I went through this damn thing frame by frame. Whoever was on Twitter who told me how to do that might be regretting it right now. Nonetheless, I think that's about all I had to say on this one, and I think it is probably plenty. So, if there's another animatic, maybe I'll do another video if I feel like I have something interesting to say about it. I wanted to take some time to talk about this one because it is a much more full-fledged piece of animation, which gave me a lot more opportunities to just sit around and nerd out about how cool it is. And seriously, just look at that fight animation. That's just some gorgeous fucking work. I don't know who worked on this thing, but they're brilliant. And yeah, if you have a comment, leave it down below. If you have any questions, if you want me to take a look at something else, talk about something else, I'm always open to suggestions. I read all the comments. I try to respond to as many of them as I can. Leave a like if you liked it. Leave a dislike if you want me to stop doing this shit. And I shall see you in the next video.